was about to be like, get husband. I was like,
Okay, now I'm ready. Sorry, guys. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, surviving this crazy weather. Did you notice it's 10 degrees warmer today than it was yesterday? Doesn't really feel like it. There it is. So that's exciting news. Okay, today we've got a lot to cover, and I had asked you guys to read that Secret Diary of William Byrd, which is such a strange document in so many ways, and it's just so revealing, and you got to kind of feel sorry for the guy. He never meant for any of us to be reading this diary, and yet there are volumes of it, and it's our best glimpse into his era and into his culture. So if you remember when we were talking yesterday, or 2 days ago, I was ending by talking about what had happened in the English Civil War. And I want to break that down a little bit and go through a few details, with apologies to those of you who took me in Western Heritage, because you got this there as well. But you'll get just a slight reminder of that. But I want to give you a couple of dates, more than a couple. I'm going to give you several dates, and try and break things down and see why colonial expansion matters so much in terms of the English Reformation and what was going on there. The key moment comes in 1534. This is the great date, one of the great dates in English history, because almost everything is reversed from the tradition of England, and I don't want to get too much into this now, but you guys are welcome to ask questions about it, but I'll probably go through it fairly quickly. England was very, very happily Roman Catholic. There was the Catholic Church there was flourishing. There was no corruption in that Catholic Church, unlike in other places like in Germany. There was a lot of corruption in the Catholic Church, Italy as well, but none in England. England was very satisfied to be Roman Catholic. And then you get this young king who's incredibly arrogant by the name of Henry VIII. And Henry demands full control, not only over his people, but over the religion as well. And so he undoes the Magna Carta, he undoes the tradition, and he gets Parliament to pass what's called the Act of Supremacy. Now, at that point, with the Act of Supremacy, Henry becomes both king and pope at the same time, right? Which is not something we see normally in the Western tradition. This is what's called Caesaropapism, where you put together what happens with Caesar and the pope. And it's not been the tradition in the West, all the way back to David and Nathan. It's not the tradition in the West to have those two offices together, but rather, as we saw with Nathan and David, to make sure that they're separated. Government's not church, and church is not government. But Henry pulls them together. And this is where we get the beginning of what we call the Church of England, or what's generally called Anglicanism. So comes out of this. And what Anglicanism tries to do is it tries very hard to be what they call, using the Latin, they tried to be a via media. That is, they tried to be, via media means the in-between. So they tried to be neither Roman Catholic nor Protestant, but a third thing altogether, something new and unusual in the history of Christendom. And for those of you who come from this tradition, and it is a beautiful tradition, but for those of you who come from this tradition, one way that you could justify this is by saying that what the Church of England is doing is exactly what, say, the Greek Orthodox Church had done, or the Romanian Orthodox Church, or the Russian Orthodox Church, where they made kind of national churches. So there's actually a lot in common with what's going on with the Anglicans and what's going on with the Eastern Orthodox in terms of church governance and church structure. But because the Anglican Church wanted to be neither Catholic nor Protestant, they always had to balance what was going on in that church. And so it means that you're going to get all kinds of people in that church who are extremely pro-Roman Catholic, but anti-Pope. And so they want everything, they want their church to look like a Catholic church. They want priests, and they want vestments, and they want the 7 sacraments, and they want purgatory. They want all of that looks Catholic without being tied to the Pope. And so these are the kinds of people that we call the high church Anglicans. On the other side, though, and imagine you're trying to bridge all of this, on the other side, you get the people who are called low church, those who don't want any smells and bells at all. Right? So nothing that would even smack of Catholicism in any way, shape, or form. And we call these people, because they're trying to purify the church, we call them Puritans. That's the name that is given to them because they're trying to purify the church of all vestiges of Roman Catholicism. And this will become, for the next 100+ years, this will be the huge divide in England. The divide between those who are high church, meaning they're Catholic without a pope, and those who are Puritan. And I don't know how many of you have had a chance to go into a medieval Catholic church. I'm sure any of you have been to Europe. You went to one, almost certainly. But if you go into a Catholic church, you know that not only does it reek of incense, but all the stained glass tells a story. There'll be the Stations of the Cross that tell the story of Calvary. You have statues of saints everywhere throughout all of this. You really can't walk around the church without tripping on a shrine or something. And then, if you've ever been into, say, a New England Puritan house of worship, it looks like this room. It's whitewashed or off-color white in the walls. The glass is completely clear, and no smells at all, except just people congregating, right? Certainly no incense. And everything in the church is centered on the pulpit, which has the Bible on it. Whereas if you go to a Catholic church, it's all centered on the tabernacle with the Eucharist in it. And so that's the difference between high church and low church. So notice, and you guys, I'm sure you've all been over to our chapel here. It's an Anglican chapel. And it has Catholic symbolism all over it, but no stained glass. Right? It's the compromise. It's both Protestant and Catholic at the same time. So that's what's going on as we think about this division. Well, this changes into, and England is struggling to make this work, and they're going to fail at making it work. But this turns into a great division that we call the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. And I'll explain, it's kind of goofy why they have those names. If you've ever seen a picture of a 1980s heavy metal band, you've seen guys who look like the Cavaliers. So the Cavaliers, when they went out into public, they would wear these huge, if their hair wasn't quite proper, they would wear these huge wigs, very curly hair that would go all the way down to the end of their back. And they just had this massive, massive hair. Whereas the Roundheads, because they're trying to show that they're not vain at all, they would literally just put a bowl on their head and give themselves a haircut like that. So, if I saw you across campus, I would immediately know, even if you're at a great distance, I would know if you're a Cavalier or a Roundhead. It's just very obvious. And so the Roundheads, and this is what happens, you guys stop me if this doesn't make sense, but what happens then, the Roundheads are low church. They also always, and they're Calvinist. I didn't say that yet, but they're Calvinists. They're very serious Calvinists. They're not, I hope you guys know this, a Scottish Calvinist is not quite an English Calvinist, and an English Calvinist is not quite a Dutch Calvinist. They're all Calvinists, but they have variations in their doctrine. which is why to this day they have separate churches as well. So that just keep that in mind. It's not, Calvinism's not uniform, but there are things in it that they all hold to be true. But most of the Calvinists in England, the Low Church Roundheads, they almost all tended to be very, not wealthy, but very middle class. So they were well-to-do, but they were not wealthy. So how do you guys get that distinction, right? So they're well-to-do, but they're not wealthy. Yeah, I'm guessing like probably most of us in this classroom, they're middle class. Definitely not poor, but not wealthy either. Whereas the Cavaliers tend all to be extremely wealthy. So they represent the wealth. Now, that means, and this is partly economic, it's partly religious, it's partly political, but it means that all the Roundheads, when they find their support in government, because they're middle class and they're populace, they find their comfort in Parliament. Parliament is their institution. And educationally, they almost all go to Cambridge. So they're tied to both Parliament and Cambridge. Whereas all of the elites, the high church Anglicans, the Cavaliers, they are almost all pro-king. So they're in the King's Party, what's called the King's Party. And they've almost all gone to school at Oxford. Right, so everybody following me so far? You guys see this division between these two groups. All right, well, they come to an open civil war, just as brutal and bloody as I mentioned on Monday as our American Civil War. Horrific, absolutely horrific. The kind of stuff where literally the Anglicans would be defeated, they would hide in a church for security, and the Calvinists would burn the church down and burn everybody alive inside of it. This is just as brutal as you can possibly imagine. And we have even great moments, amazing moments. And I'm not taking sides here. It was a crazy conflict. But you have these great moments where the Anglicans, literally as they're being burned alive, they're singing the Te Deum. And so it's a mix, and the Te Deum is the oldest hymn in church history. And so there they are singing the oldest hymn in church history, and it's a mix. If you're standing outside the church, you can hear the hymn mixed with them burning alive and the screams and them trying to, it's incredible. And so the king, the leader of the Cavaliers, is a guy named Charles II. And Charles is captured at the end of the 1640s. He is captured and he is beheaded. But the Calvinists, even though they don't recognize the king's kind of quasi-Catholic religion, they do allow him sanctuary in a very little church in England called Little Gidding. And if you guys know that at all, it's because T.S. Eliot wrote his final of the 4 quartets called Little Gidding intentionally. Eliot was very much a monarchist and very much in favor of this side of the English Revolution. And so in Little Gidding, the king is able to not only go to confession, but to receive last rites before he's executed. So to this day, it's fascinating. If you talk to anyone who's a member of the Church of England, just ask them what they think of Charles II. And if they're high church, Charles is a saint. If not, if they're not high church, he's a villain. But all within the Anglican Church itself. So quite a marker, and I always find that fascinating that you would have that kind of divide. Okay, well, what's that mean for us? Why talk about this when we're in American Heritage class? Well, notice the dates here, right? The English Revolution, the Civil War, is in the 1640s. So all of Virginia starts in 1607, and all of New England starts in 1620. And what happens then, and this is what I told you guys briefly on Monday, what happens is all the Puritans know this civil war is coming, and they're afraid that the Anglicans, the high church Anglicans, will win. And so they start creating settlements in North America. In case they're destroyed in England, they can carry on their faith in New England. And so they automatically, and I hope this is clear, they hate the Virginians. It's not that they dislike them, they hate them. Right? These people are absolutely the enemy in every way, shape, and form. Now, on the other side, what happens? Well, remember, the Cavaliers are really, really wealthy, and they have huge estates. And so what they do is the first son of every Cavalier family gets the land inherited in England. But the second son of every Cavalier family goes to Virginia and starts a plantation, just in case the Puritans win the Civil War, the family can continue in Virginia. Is that clear for everybody what's happening here? So again, and what do the Virginians think of the New Englanders? They absolutely hate them. These are the people that they would be bloodying, killing in the streets back home. And so, I mentioned this on Monday, but what's truly amazing is that we don't have an American Civil War until 1861. And that's how long it takes for those Puritans to come into contact with those high church Anglicans. And to the point where they're wrestling over Missouri, they're wrestling over what the U.S. is, they're wrestling over the issue of slavery, all of those things. And, it's pretty amazing. And again, we'll talk about this later in the semester. But if you look at who votes for Abraham Lincoln in 1860, it is all the Puritans, all the New Englanders, and their progeny as they immigrate west. So every place that gives its support to Abraham Lincoln is a place that the Puritans had settled and had conquered. And, Lincoln, there are 33 states at the time of the American Civil War. Lincoln is only on the ballot in 15 of those 33 states, but they're the populated states. And so he legitimately wins that election. But that's all the Puritan base that gives it to him. So that's why I want you guys, and I know this is a lot to throw at you for stuff that doesn't look American, but I want you guys to understand this animosity is here from the very beginning. And, again, if you had a chance to listen to my lecture online at YouTube on New England, you know this about the New Englanders. When they come over, they are already very, very democratic. They're incredibly democratic. And they're incredibly egalitarian, right? It is mom and dad and their kids. It's a nuclear family, the kind of family that every one of us in this room would recognize as our definition of family. But notice, and I hope you guys caught this, even reading the readings or listening to my lecture, women in New England, because they're Calvinist, are almost exactly equal to men in society. Because if you're saved, you're saved. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or you're a woman. So New England, even though it's very restrictive on certain things, New England is also incredibly liberal in the modern sense, with family and so forth. And so that really matters. And also, I want you guys, and again, I'm repeating what I said in that lecture, but I want you guys to keep in mind, we often, think about if I just, if this were day one last week and I had been here and I had walked into you guys and I had said, okay, just open it up. Someone described to me a Puritan. You would have all said, oh, someone dressed in black and dour and doesn't believe in dancing, doesn't believe, right? That's our image of the Puritan, because we get it from plays like The Crucible and we get it from Nathaniel Hawthorne novels. But that's really not the case at all. I'll just give you a couple of examples that, and again, this was all in the lecture, but just stuff to keep in mind. Women, and this is very typical of any woman living on a frontier, women wore incredibly vibrant colors, more so than you would have worn in London by far. And it's because a frontier's dreary. It's neat, it's cool, but it's dreary. And so women would just bring as much color as possible into that. So women aren't walking around in black in New England. The guys are, but women aren't walking around in black. Or we think about Puritans. Well, it's amazing, just as a statistic, the Puritans had more out of wedlock pregnancies than any other ethnic group in America. But they could handle it because the process was, all right, you got pregnant before marriage, now you get married, and it's taken care of. Right, don't get me wrong, I'm not urging any of you to do that. I just want you to know that they had ways of taking care of that, and they had incredible family stability. Right, so yes, it was a sin to have sex outside of marriage, no doubt about that, but nobody was killed for it. Nobody was executed. Nobody was whipped for it. It's like, yeah, it happened. Now we take care of it. It's actually pretty humane in the way they dealt with that. Or if you've ever, and I took a whole course on this, I'm not sure why I took a course on this in grad school, but I took a course on Puritan poetry. Man, that stuff's embarrassing. It is so sexual. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to know that. I mean, it's amazing. So my point is, don't take the stereotype of the Puritans. I wouldn't be one, and they would have executed me as a Catholic. I would never have survived in their society, nor would I have wanted to. But if you say to me, Brad, what are some good societies in history? It's a pretty good one. Not perfect by any means, but it's pretty good overall. Last thing I'll tell you about the Puritans, and again, I had this in my lecture, but I always think this is hilarious. A Puritan considered it a sin, and I don't drink at all, so don't. I gave up drinking about a year ago, but a Puritan considered it a sin if you didn't drink. And the reason is because Jesus drank. And it was like, do you really think you're better than Jesus? That was their question. I think that's hilarious. So, those are the kinds of things that I think we need to think about when we're thinking about the Puritans. Now, let me say this about them as well. The Puritans have an incredible run. They have a great first generation. They have a great second generation. And then in the third generation, everything falls apart. The whole society collapses in on itself. And there's a very specific reason for this. In 1676, remember they've landed in 1620, but in 1676, they get into a war with the local Indians, and it is a total war where they're just massacring one another. And I'd have to look up these statistics, and I should have this morning. I apologize for not doing that. But I know it's something like this. Something like 1 out of every 3 Puritans was killed in this war. And almost every village was attacked. So you've got just massive devastation. And what they did to the Indians was just as bad. So, you've got just killing everywhere over a 1-year period between 1676 and 1677. Just amazing brutality. And the Puritans never recover from that. And think about this. What do the Puritans, the Calvinists, believe in more than anything else? They believe in the covenant. And that if your society is doing well, that's great, right? It's absolutely fantastic because you have God's favor. But when something like that Indian war hits, you don't know what you've done to displease God. And so in the same way that a covenant can give a people intense security, it can also give them equally intense insecurity. Because God doesn't show up and say, all right, guys, you need to correct this, this, and this. Right? It's a mystery. And so by the time we get to 1692, the Puritans are burning their teenage girls as witches. And I think we can all be pretty clear about this, that if any society is killing its teenage girls, something has gone very, very wrong. So really an amazing thing. So the Puritans are great for a bit, but they fall apart. But they give us, and I think that, especially at a place like Hillsdale, we have to understand, it's the Puritans who become the Republican Party. It's the Puritans who become the anti-slavery forces in America. It's the Puritans who really launch our literary culture. And again, you guys may all know this, but wherever a Calvinist goes, this is true anywhere in the world, the Calvinists always have two books with them. They always have their Geneva Bible, and they always have their collection of Plato and Cicero. So they're always classical in what they're doing. And that's really important for us as Americans. Okay, well now, do you guys, anybody have questions on any of that? And again, I know I'm repeating a lot of what you got last week listening to my lecture, but there's just some stuff I wanted to go back over and make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, well, let's then turn to this really weird document you guys have, and the secret diary of William Byrd, right? And it truly was secret. In fact, he wrote it in a strange kind of script, and it had to all be translated. And it wasn't translated until about 100 years ago. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Byrds. The Byrds are one of the most prominent families in Virginia. In fact, growing up, Robert Byrd was the senator from Virginia, and he had been in for like 50 years in government. There's no Byrd in Congress right now, as far as I know, but they're still like the first. They and the Washingtons, they'll remember George didn't have any children. So really the Byrds are the first family of Virginia coming out of the founding. And here's their ancestor, William Byrd. And it actually, believe it or not, it was Robert Byrd, a senator, that got the money to translate all these diaries about his ancestor. And here we have, and I want you guys to know too, if you caught this, we just give you 1 month of his diary. We actually gave you the least R-rated version possible, just for the sake of you guys reading this. So let's contrast this to what we see in Puritan New England. Here we are in Anglican Virginia, among the elite, a second son of one of these elite families. And you guys all realize, right? I hope this has been clear. George Washington, his family is a second son. George Mason, his family is a second son. James Madison, his family is a second son, right, his ancestor. So all of the great people, the Custuses, the Lees, Robert E. Lee, right, all of these great Southern families that we'll know during the Civil War, they're all the families that came over to escape the Puritans originally. So Jefferson was not among them because Jefferson was poor, but his dad, Peter, made a ton of money. And that's why Jefferson made money as well. But they were not part of that. They were the poor who came over and then made it, rather than being part of the wealthy who came over. Okay, so what do we know about William Byrd? You guys just, you feel free to state the obvious. You've read his diary. What can we say about him, both good and bad? Let's start with the good for a bit. What's good about him or interesting about him? And you guys tell me your names when you raise your hands, and I call on you. So, Leon, I know.
He's religious, at least to an extent.
Okay, why? Talk about that. How so?
Well, he's always talking about praying, and whenever he doesn't pray, he mentions, "Oh, I forgot to pray today."
Okay. All right, let's think about this for a moment. He's always talking about prayer. It's clearly an important part of his life at some level. But think about the time it took for him to write down in his diary, "I forgot to pray today." Let's say that any of us in this room are evangelical. Couldn't you just say, "Dear Jesus, thank you for a wonderful day. I'm sorry I didn't talk to you more. Let's make that better tomorrow, please, by your grace. Good night." That's the same amount of time that it takes to write down in your diary, "I forgot to pray." So what does he mean by prayer? Yeah, what's your name?
I'm Connor.
Connor, that's right, thank you.
Would that mean like he forgot to say whatever the Anglican version of the
Yeah,
is?
yeah, which could take 15 minutes to an hour, right? So he's got a prayer book. He's got the Anglican prayer book, what would be called the Office of the Hours or the Liturgy of the Hours. And so to do your prayers is a very formal, convoluted process. So it's not just, Jesus, sorry, I messed up. Let's help me tomorrow. It's the whole, oh God, thou art great, thou art, right? And you go through the whole thing, and it could take a very, very long time. So, okay, that explains, it's a legitimate prayer. There's no, I think probably most of us in this room would probably be pretty comfortable with, hey, Jesus, sorry, I screwed up today. But you can understand a more formal society would be skeptical of that, right? In fact, they would call, and we'll deal with this probably next week, but they would call what I just did, they would call that blasphemous, because by relying on myself to pray rather than the tradition of prayer, I'm allowing my ego to intervene, and I'm putting I before God by doing that. That's not how we think, but that's how they would have thought. So it would actually be somewhat sinful to pray in a spontaneous manner like that. Right? Again, I'm not asking you guys to agree with that. I just want you to know the time frame and what's happening. Okay, so that's good. What else is good about this guy? And I know there's a lot of bad, but what else? Yeah, your name?
Ross.
Ross, thank you.
He's got a job
Okay.
with the governor, it looks like.
Yep. So what would you say if you had to say, Ross, if you had to say, what is this guy involved in? What would it be?
Man, well, he goes to work, but he rarely talks about, like, the majority of the stuff he does. He just plays cards pretty quickly after it.
So he's networking, right? He's a politician. He's networking.
Okay.
So he's going into the Capitol, he meets with the governor, he's not the governor, but he's very high up, probably right below lieutenant governor, right? So he's probably like the third most important person in Virginia. And when he's networking, they go play cards, right? They go sit down there, play cards, and of course it's fun too, it's not like it's not fun, but they're probably playing poker, or maybe they're playing some kind of form of bridge, and it's all competitive. But it's a way to sit around and work out deals. Well, you guys do this, I do this, that, and that. Well, what if you win this hand? Well, if you win this hand, then I'll put an extra tax on, whatever it may be. So they're doing this. Okay, what else? And let's do a downside to him for a moment. If he's working here, who's working his plantation? Ross?
His slaves?
Yeah. One of the only reasons this guy can do what he does is because he probably owns a massive amount of slaves who are actually doing the real labor. So even there, when we're thinking about the good, it's mixed with the bad, right? So this guy's a slave owner, clearly. And yet we don't really notice in his diary, how often does he talk about his slaves? Yeah, not much. Right? It's not prominent, and that could be both a good sign and a bad sign. It could be a bad sign that he's neglecting them. It could also be a good sign that he's got a fairly healthy community that doesn't resent him, so he's not worried about uprisings or anything like that. So maybe he was actually, and obviously all slave owning is evil, but within slave owning, there are people who treat their slaves better than others. So we may be able to take this as, okay, he treated his slaves fairly well, even in the evil of slavery. That's possible. So again, but we don't know. We don't know. But notice and I think this is really important, and you guys forgive me, I don't mean to be crude, but it's clear he's not sleeping with his slaves. That's really important. Really, really important. You can't say that about Thomas Jefferson. But we can say that about William Byrd. Okay. Ingles.
I was going to say he has a routine. Like, every single day he wakes up and eats his boiled milk.
Yeah, he loves his boiled milk.
Yeah, and he talks about reading Hebrew and Greek, and he tries to keep the same routine.
Okay, so, keep going, Ingles. What languages does he know?
Hebrew, Greek, and Russian.
Yeah, he knows Latin too.
And then he reads Homer.
Yeah, so he's reading Greek, right? Okay, anybody catch? There's one other modern language he knows. Yeah. Italian, why? Why would anyone learn Italian? I mean, I don't mean that against the Italians. Obviously, if you guys know Dr. Vincenzi, there's a good reason to learn Italian right there. But why would an educated New Virginian read that? Yeah, what's your name?
Katie.
Katie.
Maybe for like Dante.
That's it. It's the whole reason everybody wants to read Dante in the original. That's incredible. You learn a whole language to read one great work. Right? That's so okay. I count that very much in this guy's favor. He is classical. He knows Greek. He knows Latin. He knows Hebrew, and he's taught himself Italian. Now again, he can only do that because he has slaves. They're doing the work. He gets the fun. Right? That's critical to understanding here. But he's deeply educated. Inglis, I'm going to push you a little bit more. What else did he do in his routine? Did you catch that? Every morning, he boils his milk, he reads, and he dances. Do you know what that was? He dances his dance. It was, believe it or not, it was a form of kind of Tai Chi or martial arts or yoga that he would practice in his room, and it's his exercise. So there is a routine and there's an order to everything he does, right? There's nothing truly spontaneous. Okay, now the worst part of this and the R-rated part of this, though it is within wedlock, but what's his relationship with his wife? What do we know about his wife? And you guys, we're of age, so just be open about this. What's his relationship with his wife? What is she to him? Do they study Hebrew together? Do they study Latin, Greek, read their Homer together, read Dante together? Does he go seek advice from her? What is she? Yeah, what's your name?
Nora.
Nora.
For the most part, it seems like she's just kind of to the side. She's for pleasure. It describes.
You said for pleasure?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It describes him talking with her, and like they go to different social events together. But I don't know. She seems more of like a trophy wife kind of.
Thank you. Exactly. She's a trophy wife, and again, let me be blunt. She's there for sex. That's her job. Her job is to make sure that he's satisfied. And so that's her role. Now, think about this. What would that wife, and let's say that she's the wife of the third most important person in Virginia. What would she be considered if she lived in New England? And again, be blunt. Would she have any respect in New England? She's a prostitute. That's all she is. Right? There's nothing more to her than that. So that's why I want you guys, and why I think it's so important we look at this secret diary. Man, and this is true for every one of the women in this room. Now, if you're born in colonial America, you want to be born in New England. You do not want to be born in Virginia at all. So that's what, and there's a clear social distinction. And again, think about New England. Everybody's equal in New England as long as you're one of the elect, which is almost everybody. Right? So you've got this general, broad kind of understanding of what society is. Look at Virginia. In Virginia, everything is hierarchical. Everything. It's elite white men, and then it's middle class men, and then it's enslaved men, and then it's white women, and then it's black women. Right? That's what you're looking at in this hierarchy, in the way that they understand this. So that's a stunning thing. And so notice, what do we have in America? From the very beginning of our colonial origins, we have an egalitarian society and we have a deeply hierarchical society. They're not, how could they get along? They have nothing in common with each other. And remember, they had just been fighting each other in England. So again, I want you to keep that in mind. Okay, anybody have further thoughts on William Byrd or anything else dealing with him or Virginia? And I know I sound like I'm just railing on Virginia, but we do get good people, obviously. I mean, George Washington is maybe the greatest man that America's ever produced. So it's not like all evil comes out of this. But I do want you guys to know that it's a bizarre, very, I would call it un-American, but it's a very bizarre manifestation socially. Yeah, tell me your name again.
Mary?
Mary,
This
thank
is kind of a
you.
random question, but was he related at all to the William Byrd, who's the composer? Or is that just same last name, different?
I don't know that. I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure if they're related or not. Is he an American composer?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think he may have been English or
Okay.
Canadian.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry I don't know that. That's a good question, Mary, but I don't know. So we'll have to look that up.
He was like he's like the primary composer of Anglican music. Like Anglican choral music now is still all.
Okay, it may be the same family. At some point it probably was the same family.
Maybe this.
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
I would kind of
Was it?
doubt
I'm sorry, Ross?
I'm Connor.
Connor. Gosh,
I
I'm
would
sorry.
doubt it
Sorry.
A little bit because William Byrd, the composer, is Catholic.
Oh.
That would make it unlikely.
No, then it's unlikely. They're the same family. Yeah, thanks, Connor. I'm sorry I got your name wrong. You're Ross, right? Yeah. Thank you. I'll get this right, guys. I apologize. So, okay, good. So I want to say one other thing, and then we're going to turn to Maryland for a moment. And I don't think we'll finish, but we'll get started with Maryland. And I want to get through these colonies pretty quickly. I like this stuff, but I want to get to the founding and then move from there forward. So you guys forgive me, I've just got my own bias in teaching this course and what I like and what I don't. Well, I shouldn't say I don't like it, because I do, but I don't like it as much. One other thing that I want you guys to know about colonial America that I think is critical. Almost every one of us in this room was brought up being taught that colonial America was for religious freedom. We're taught that this is why they come to the colonies. They come to the colonies for religious freedom. I want to completely disabuse us of that notion. Hardly anyone came here for religious freedom. What they came for was religious autonomy. That is, when the Puritans come, they're not coming for religious freedom, they're coming for the freedom for themselves to worship as they see fit. They don't want the Baptists to do it, or the Catholics, or the Jews. That's not what they're thinking. So there's not religious freedom. There's religious toleration and autonomy within groups, but not outside of groups. And I say this because, and I think this is probably surprising to a lot of us now, but the most persecuted people in New England were the Baptists. They were absolutely hated. And they were imprisoned, sometimes they were killed, but they were absolutely hated. And you would think the Catholics would be number one, but there weren't enough Catholics around for them to be hated. So in theory, the Puritans hated the Catholics most, but they're not around. So there aren't actual persecutions of Catholics, whereas there are of Baptists. And the same thing is true in Virginia. You know, we rarely think about this, but in Virginia, you had to be a member of the Church of England all the way up until 1833. That was the legal religion of Virginia. And you couldn't be Baptist, you couldn't be Catholic, you couldn't be Puritan. None of those things. It was illegal. So that's what I want you guys to understand. And I'm going to tell you something, and I want you all to write this down. It's cheesy, but you'll remember it. The best way to think about America is this. Imagine that America is a vast ocean. It's a vast ocean, but there are islands of intolerance. And so when you come to America, you live in a settlement, but that settlement is an island of intolerance. So basically what you have the freedom to do when you leave England, you have the freedom to choose which intolerance you want to live under. That's what, and I say this for a lot of reasons. One, I want to undo what so many of us have been taught. But I also want to present this. When the American Revolution comes, there is absolute religious freedom. And that tells you how utterly beautiful and radical the American Revolution is. It's incredible, bless you. It's absolutely incredible that we have that changes to that degree. And it's not something, we don't, in the history of the world, we don't see a lot of religious freedom. That's not the norm. The norm is always religious intoleration, and that's what the colonies come out of as well. So keep that in mind. Now, here's what I want to tell you guys, and we'll end with this today. But let's think about the other myth we have about colonial America. Every religion gets its own colony. So New England, the Puritans, the Virginians get Anglicanism, Pennsylvania, Quaker, right? This is what we always do this, and we always then end by saying, and even the Catholics got Maryland. So I want to tell you what happens in Maryland. We're not going to get that far today. I'll finish it up when we meet on Friday. But this is what happens in Maryland. Maryland is indeed a Catholic colony. And here's what happens. The King of England looks around and he sees that he still has a number of Catholics. Why? Because in 1534, when Henry declared the Act of Supremacy, his main opposition came from the aristocracy, who were all Roman Catholic. And so what they did, the families either converted by force to the Church of England, or they pretended to do that and they went underground. And this is where, and I can never, this is my Kansan coming out here, I can never say this word right. This is what is called, again, I'm not going to say it right, a recusant community. That is, there are these secret Catholic communities that exist, and Jesuit priests will secretly go from one estate to another and say Mass. And that's, I'm sure you guys have at least heard the term priest holes in castles. And those priest holes are, if the Anglicans show up, the Catholic priest can hide and be protected. So there's still, even as of the early 1600s, there are a number of these very aristocratic but secretive Roman Catholics in England. And the king wants to get rid of them. He knows they're there. He doesn't know who all they are. He wants to get rid of them. And so he says, well, all right, you all have amnesty for a bit. And you guys, again, I hope you know, it's illegal to be Roman Catholic by penalty of law. It's illegal until 1832. Right? So it's still, this is going to last quite a while. But basically the king gives amnesty. And he says, all right, you guys want to go to Maryland? Go to Maryland. Well, here's what happens. We call it a Catholic colony. Only about 20 families took him up on this. And they're very hierarchical, like the Virginians, but they all carry with them their Protestant servants. And so the Catholics are outnumbered almost 9-1, if not more, in Maryland. So we call it a Catholic colony, but it's really a very mixed colony at first. And I find this hilarious, and we'll end with this today. I want to read to you what was stated to the first Catholics who go to Maryland. This is the decree that they were given. Right, so you guys, you don't have to write this down. I just listen for a moment and take this in. Imprimis, right? Same thing as our college magazine, right? Listen. His lordship requires his said governor and commissioners that in their voyage to Maryland, not Maryland, but Maryland, tells you something, right? Automatically. How many of our states are named after the Blessed Mother? Be very careful to preserve unity and peace amongst all the passengers on shipboard, and that they will suffer no scandal nor offense to be given to any of the Protestants. Do you guys get what he just said? You Catholics, shut up. Don't harass the Protestants. Don't start a fight with them. Just be quiet. Thank God you're given a colony. And keep your place. Right? It's amazing. Whereby any just complaint may hereafter be made by them in Virginia or in England, and that for that end they cause all acts of the Roman Catholic religion to be done as privately as possible, and that they instruct all the Roman Catholics to be silent upon all occasions of discourse concerning matters of religion. So the Catholics can't even have Mass on the ship. They have to do it underneath, below decks, hidden, so they don't give offense by this. So we can call that a Catholic colony, but that's not really a Catholic colony. Okay, so I wanted to end with that. Let me just give you an assignment. And sorry, guys, I took you over a minute. I'll give you that minute back at some point. I promise. I would like you guys. Okay, I'm going to have you read a lot. I would like you guys for Friday to read Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and the first Ben Franklin piece called On George Whitefield. So these are the first 3 pieces of Awakenings and Enlightenments. So read those for Friday. I'm going to finish up Maryland, and then we'll do those. So the first 3 pieces in Awakenings and Enlightenments. Okay, everybody with me on that? Good. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful Wednesday and Thursday. Be safe, be good, and I'll see you Friday morning.